Hello, my name's Phil Davies and I'm representing Mars Register, and I'm talking about our big online project to be found at mars.sale. As well as mars.sale, you will find us at marsforsale.com. Now if you go to mars.sale, you will see that we are essentially a campaign to keep space, outer space, safe and free from weapons. Now we're looking for people to join us in this campaign, and in doing so, those people will get a genuine and strong claim to vast amounts of land on planet Mars. Now that rather unusual combination is stressed throughout the website. It is also spoken about in our social media streams, which run in parallel. You'll find us at Twitter, at TrustMars, and also soon at Facebook also. So we are essentially a campaign. I'm now going to say two statements that might seem completely unrelated, but they are very much integral to our entire business. Using modern technology and following current international law, it is now feasible to develop a strong and legal claim to possession of a planet. Statement 2, the only strong applicable law to outer space right now is the old 1967 Outer Space Treaty. Now that treaty is severely at risk now from being dropped or marginalised due to being bad for business. But if it is dropped, we lose its strength against weapons, and that would be a very bad thing. So these two statements form the why and the what behind our entire business project. The why is essentially our mission statement, and it concerns the Space Treaty. We think, as many do, that we need an updated Space Treaty. The current Space Treaty was developed in 1967. An amazing achievement at the time, but it is a child of its time. It's very strong against weapons of mass destruction being placed in space. It is also strong against national appropriation of celestial land concerning sovereignty issues. It stops countries grabbing land on planets and asteroids. It doesn't make mention specifically of individuals or companies. But the key issue is it is not creating any framework for space business. And as a result, space exploration and space business has largely been at standstill for 20 years. The United Nations Committee of Peaceful Uses of Outer Space was the committee that developed the Outer Space Treaty originally, and it's been sitting ever since. Although it's come out with a lot of small agreements, there is nothing like a treaty or even a declaration that can improve or enhance the current space treaty. There is no framework for business. Because of that, fundraising for business projects could not take place. And the Americans especially have been very frustrated with this over the years. Such that eventually, last year, President Obama signed the United States Space Act, otherwise known as the Asteroid Act. But that gives them, in their own law, the ability to go off, grab an asteroid, mine it, and keep the resources. Now that rips right into the Space Treaty. American lawyers do argue otherwise, but most would argue that that rips straight into the Space Treaty. Now we can understand why they've had to do that, because there is no framework for space commerce. In order to prevent countries making up their own laws, and also to prevent the Space Treaty from being dropped, we think an update is long overdue. The Space Treaty can be dropped by any spacefaring nation with just 1 year's notice, and it's very much on the cards. It is very obvious it is seen as a hurdle by some countries, something to get round, something to push aside, potentially something to drop. But it is the only law out there stopping weaponization of space. So what we say is pretty much what the United Nations knows anyway. We say you need an updated treaty, one that actually does create a framework for space business, including mining. One that stays strong against weaponization and also deals with dual use equipment that is already in space, stuff that can be weaponized, and also Earth-based space weapons, things like lasers potentially targeting satellites. And the new treaty would also need to tackle not just national sovereign appropriation of celestial land, but stopping individuals or companies from grabbing land. Essentially the sort of loophole that we're taking advantage of right now in order to gain leverage to enforce the things that we want the United Nations to do. So that's the sort of space treaty we'd like to see, and I think the UN already knows it's the sort of treaty it needs. We would also like to see some form of stewardship, even with a good law in place. As space business becomes bigger and bigger, I think you do need something like UN trusteeship of space. Now, UN trusteeship's been tried and tested already. It's worked for countries that need governance on Earth, so it should work in outer space. And we're not talking about a big bureaucratic committee. Something like a space and business savvy panel that can sign off business contracts for those space companies, but also maintain the wider celestial land in the possession of humanity. So we're looking for a new space treaty and UN trusteeship. Now, how are we going to influence that? Well, what we want to do is provide a jolt or a stimulus to the United Nations committees that are meeting to actually go ahead and seize the spirit of 1967 and agree an update to the treaty. Currently, there are little cliques forming, proposing codes of practice that the other cliques clearly don't agree with. And it's a game of show and tell. Plenty of tell but no show. And everyone seems quite happy to leave it like that. And that's not good enough. But how are we going to influence that? Well, this is where the campaign comes in. And also, it's where our claim to Mars comes in. We can use that as leverage. So how have we got a legitimate claim to Mars? Well, we've looked very closely at public international law, also private law and space law, in order to develop a genuine legal claim to possession of planet Mars. International law gives us guidelines as to what is required to gain land on Earth. Specifically, two very famous professors from Yale University in the last century, McDougall and Lasswell, contributed greatly to public international law, especially on these international issues of land acquisition. And also did a lot of work in space law leading up to the space treaty. So they're good to look at, and their work is quite pivotal. And what they did was they distilled down a lot of information to describe the criteria required by a country, but also potentially individuals, to acquire new land. For land that was ready for settlement and abundant with resources, they call that Category 1 land. And they said in order to possess that, a country would have to actually put people there in a settlement and prove trade. That way, they would satisfy the criteria for possession. They also created a Category 2 land, sort of in-between land, and then a Category 3 land. Category 3 was regarded as distant, difficult, relatively barren, resources difficult to obtain for trade, settlement not easy. They were thinking of the polar regions and also some relatively barren islands like Clipperton and Las Palmas. And in order to satisfy possession legally for those areas, you didn't have to go there and settle. You didn't have to prove trade. You just had to make your claim of possession, declare intent to occupy, show some element of administrative governance, and in the cases of countries that would be state governance, and also attempt to some early actions to either benefit the land or perhaps improve it and make it ready for future settlement. Now those are the sort of criteria required for that difficult, distant, relatively barren Category 3 land on Earth. And that's exactly what we've done. Our claim of possession is based on just those criteria of proof. It's because we have said that Mars is sufficiently difficult, distant and relatively barren that it would qualify for a similar amount of proof. So by using international law and looking at space law, we can say that we have developed a strong legal claim. It is easy to make a claim, it is easy to declare intent to occupy, it's relatively easy to develop some governance plans. The difficult one, of course, is how, if we're staying on Earth, can we somehow positively add some benefit, even if it's small, to Mars. And that's where the use of strong laser light comes in. For 6 years, since we first made our claim to Mars, we have been targeting the planet with strong laser light. These are strong lasers. This is 3.5 watts. Strong lasers that are aligned and fixed to astronomical telescopes. Telescopes which are sitting on an automatic tracking mount. That means they can fix on a planet and follow it for 10-15 minutes with the laser applied following the planet accurately. Therefore, we can mathematically prove we are shedding, at times, quadrillions of photons upon planet Mars per second for up to 10 minutes at a time. Now, in reality, that's a very small amount of energy applied to the planet. But we've been doing it repeatedly for over 6 years as part of our claim of possession. Now, we're saying that that adds a very small non-zero amount of benefit to the planet. We say benefit because virtually every text that describes the future needs and requirements of terraforming Mars, terraforming meaning making ready for human settlement, virtually every text will talk about the need to generate an atmosphere on Mars. Mars doesn't really have much of an atmosphere, but it does have a lot of carbon dioxide in dry ice form in the polar regions and also spread in the soil throughout the rest of the planet. Now, periodically, with the seasons on Mars, that will sublimate off, or sort of evaporate effectively, into gas form, and then it will freeze up again in the winter time. Already that is happening. Scientists say that just a 3 degrees rise in the planet's temperature will actually liberate enough carbon dioxide from the polar regions especially to form a blanketing greenhouse effect. A bad thing on Earth, but great for Mars. Sufficient to cause a generation of an atmosphere sufficient for humans not to have to wear pressure suits. It means you could work outside with just breathing apparatus, but nothing else. So it's viewed as a very important part of the terraforming process. They've talked about perhaps using orbiting solar mirrors to direct light from the sun upon the polar regions to cause this process of greenhouse effect. They've talked about solar lasers. They've even talked about lasers generating a fusion reaction in locations on the planet. They've also talked about more focal experiments using perhaps smaller heat sources, even lasers focused on smaller areas of the planet, experimenting to see what might happen with different degrees of heat applied. But what we can definitely say is, in line with the idea that heat provides a benefit to Mars, we can provide light and heat through our lasers. So the energy given from our lasers will be able to liberate carbon dioxide in certain locations into the atmosphere. It may even be able to help convert ice into water, and certainly if there is any primitive organic photosynthetic life on Mars, well, those blue and red photons that we're shining there will provide direct benefit to that life. So we argue that that is a non-zero benefit to the planet. That is all in keeping with the requirements of possession. Now, the final requirement of a claim to possession is this show of governance. Now, we have done that, but it involves all the people who are to join us in this campaign. So I will kind of describe the governance framework a little bit later. First, I'll describe how we bring people to our campaign. Well, there may well be, and hopefully there are, people out there who share our sort of political goal, the idea that we do genuinely need an updated space treaty to keep space safe from weapons. Now, they may well identify more with our social media campaigns. They may well even develop their own social media campaigns to lobby the United Nations to crack on with new decisions on space treaties. Our core website at mars.sail concentrates a bit more on an alternative type of person. We do know that there are thousands of people out there who are willing to pay a lot of money for what are novelty deeds to celestial lands, plots of lands on the moon, Mars, Venus, etc. Companies are out there that purport to be celestial registries. There is no such thing as a true celestial registry just yet. Only the United Nations could acceptably form such a body. But these companies are issuing deeds for which you pay good money. But the pennies dropped with them long ago. They know that they have to put a stamp on those deeds saying this is a novelty gift. It's a lot of money for a novelty gift, often $30 plus for 1 acre. As long as you know what you're getting, then it's a nice gift. I've got one from many years ago. It's a bit like a world's best dad certificate. But there's a business that we can tap into. A market certainly we can tap into. So we're offering claims that are legally valid, much stronger than anything that's gone before. The only claims based on actual acts of possession that are in line with international law. These are claim certificates rather than deeds. But they're 1,000 times cheaper than what they're charging. For a standard price of 1 cent, you can get 10 acres of Mars. 1 cent. And that gets you a claim that actually has some genuine strength and does not have a novelty gift stamp upon it. Now, that tiny price is there because we're trying to pay off our hosting fees and advertising fees. We'll be lucky to get there. We'd need many thousands of people to pay off our business costs. It's conceivable we could go into profit, but we'd need to be huge for that. And that's not our goal. Honestly, the campaign is our goal. With plenty of people on board with multiple different motivations, we can go to the United Nations with our claim, looking to get due process, a consideration for title registration. Because it is the UN, they're the only game in town that could form a celestial registry. And this is where our governance comes in. We're looking to bring all the names as part of an application for first registration to the United Nations on a monthly basis. Should the United Nations grant us registration of land on Mars? Highly unlikely, but should they do so, we would form the Mars Trust, by which all co-claimants would become contingent beneficiaries, and the UN itself would become the trustee. That arrangement is made because ultimately we want to do the UN a favour. You see, the UN is the body that decides on space law and can make space safer through increasing the strength of the laws that apply to space. But they can also form a celestial registry. They're the only entity that probably can. And therefore they can hear our case. They can subject our demands for due process to that very legal process. And we're going to them saying, here is our legal claim, and if you find it satisfactory, then you become the trustee. Ultimately, we would look to the UN to take all of the land from us for a nominal fee, and only if they have got the space treaty updated and ratified. So yes, in some ways, our claimants might not get land. They may get some nominal fee payment. But it's worth looking at this a little bit more analytically. What might the consequences be for claimants that join us in this? Well, there is some chance, probably the most likely outcome, that they get a certificate and nothing much seems to happen. We are relatively ignored by the United Nations. But that still means that that claim stays strong. It is the first claim to follow international law, and it is the first claim to sneak through space law. And it does. It circumvents current space law. And therefore that claim to land will stay strong, way into the future, perhaps for the descendants of the current claimants. But there's the other possibility that the United Nations and the spacefaring nations will become sufficiently twitchy and agitated by the fact that some individuals have come up with a plausible legal argument to get them land on Mars. And that might prick them enough to get on with signing a space treaty that tightens up on such things, as well as keeping space safe and working for business. So we may just get the satisfaction that we've made space safer. And very few people get to say that. There's also the possibility that if the UN did get a space treaty signed, it may feel inclined to give us the nominal award and therefore pay a nominal fee to all our claimants to get the land into United Nations trusteeship. Now that nominal fee will be just $1,000 to each claimant until the 10th of the 10th, 2017. That's the 50th anniversary of the Space Treaty. Now that's a small amount of money for the UN to pay to get a secure trusteeship of a planet. And we'll have put it on a plate to them. But if they don't seize the moment, that nominal fee will double on an annual basis, such that $1,000 becomes $1 million after 10 years. Now, we have been hounding the United Nations over the last 3 weeks since we formed. And it's been impressive in that they have communicated back with us relatively positively. I think they're starting to understand where we're moving this. And so the chance of our case being subjected to due process is very real. And we're going to keep pressing for that. So I would suggest this is now the best time to get with us. If you're thinking politically, then seize the moment. If you're thinking, I'd like some cheap land on Mars, well, you can get a claim for up to 100 square kilometers for less than $10 right now. And that's for a strong claim, the like of which has never existed before. So I invite you, please do join us right now. We use the cheesy line, do it not just for Mars, but for peace in the stars.